It was a bright Thursday afternoon in Austin, Texas, and Evan Thompson, a 38-year-old tech specialist, sat at his desk in his home office. The room, spacious and organized, reflected the meticulous nature of its owner. His eyes flicked between two screens displaying graphs and spreadsheets as he prepared for an important presentation. The investor on the other end of the video call was a major figure in the tech world, someone whose backing could turn his company into the next big thing. Everything had to go perfectly. Despite his current focus, Evan's mind wandered occasionally. The past few weeks had been unusually stressful, and the weight of a deep, unspoken feeling gnawed at him. He couldn't put his finger on it. His life from the outside seemed perfect, successful career, a beautiful wife and two lovely children, but there was a sense of emptiness he couldn't shake. Evan's wife, Natalie, was 35 and worked as a digital marketing consultant. Like Evan, she was driven and successful, managing her clients with precision and expertise. Their careers aligned perfectly, creating an illusion of harmony. They were a power couple, successful in every way imaginable. They had two kids, Leo, their 7-year-old son who loved soccer, and Olivia, their 5-year-old daughter who spent hours drawing with colored pencils. On the surface it was a dream life. But Evan felt something was missing. Natalie was always busy, often coming home late or working weekends. Their conversations had become brief, almost transactional. He tried not to think too much about it, but his unease had been growing over time. He loved her deeply, but there were moments when he wondered if their connection was slipping away. Evan glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 8 p.m. He had a conference call scheduled with an international client. He briefly texted Natalie, who was working late again, to let her know he would be staying in the office for a while. She responded with a quick, polite acknowledgement, her words distant as always. It was the kind of exchange they had fallen into over the years, brief, efficient, but lacking warmth. He couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness as he typed the last message. The conference call with the client went smoothly. Evan's voice was steady, his mind sharp as he navigated the technical details and answered questions with ease. The investor seemed impressed, nodding occasionally, taking notes. Evan knew he was in the final stretch of his pitch. He just had to close the deal. Once the call ended, Evan stretched his arms above his head and yawned. He reached for his phone to check the time, ready to wrap things up for the night. But as he moved his hand across the desk, he accidentally tapped a button on his phone, reactivating a previous call, one he had made to Natalie earlier that afternoon. It wasn't intentional, just a mistake. At first he didn't notice, thinking nothing of it. But then, as his phone buzzed lightly in his hand, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A woman's laughter. Soft, intimate laughter, one that Evan recognized immediately, though he couldn't quite place it at first. And then the unmistakable voice of a man. "Lock the door," he said, his tone hushed but unmistakably close. A knot formed in Evan's stomach. His heart began to race. The sound of the man's voice echoed in his mind, replaying over and over again. There was no mistaking it now. That voice. It was Alex, one of Natalie's old friends from college. Evan had always found their friendship a little too close for comfort. There had been times when Alex would call late at night, or drop by unexpectedly. Natalie had always assured him it was nothing to worry about, just an old friend catching up. But now, hearing that voice on the other end of the line, something inside Evan snapped. His mind raced. Was there something more to their friendship than he had ever realized? He had always been a trusting husband, but now, doubt crept in like a shadow over his thoughts. His hands were trembling slightly as he quickly ended the call, the device slipping from his grip. Evan sat still for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. A sick feeling twisted in his gut. He couldn't stay at the office any longer. He had to go home. He had to confront this head-on, whatever it was. His heart was pounding in his chest as he grabbed his keys and jacket, leaving the office in a daze. The drive home felt like it took an eternity. The streets of Austin were lit by street lamps, but Evan's mind was consumed by the growing anxiety in his chest. He had to know what was going on. He couldn't ignore it any longer. When he finally reached home, the house was eerily quiet. The lights in the hallway were dim, and the familiar scent of dinner was absent. He hadn't realized how much he had come to depend on the warmth of their home, the constant presence of his family. But tonight everything felt different, alien. Evan hesitated for a moment as he stood at the front door, taking a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. He walked through the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. The stairs creaked under his feet as he made his way up to the second floor, where Natalie's home office was. It was there that he had found comfort in the past, hearing the sound of her typing, seeing her focused on her work. But tonight there was something else, something he wasn't prepared for. As he approached the door to her office, he could hear voices. His heart skipped a beat. It was Alex's voice again, unmistakable and close. The words that followed were muffled, but the tone was unmistakable, intimate, familiar. Evan didn't wait any longer. He pushed the door open with force, his mind spinning with anger and confusion. Evan's heart raced as he swung the door open, his breath caught in his throat. Inside the room, Natalie and Alex sat close together. There were 2 glasses of red wine on the desk, their untouched liquid shimmering in the dim light of the desk lamp. The scent of the wine and the faint perfume in the air did nothing to soothe Evan's growing sense of dread. He could see the look of surprise in Natalie's eyes as she turned toward him. But it wasn't just the shock of him barging into the room. It was something deeper. Something he could feel before she even spoke. Alex, ever the charming figure, sat back in his chair with an awkward, almost guilty smile. His eyes flickered nervously between Evan and Natalie, but he said nothing. It was as if the truth had already been written in the air between them, thick and undeniable. For a moment, everything in the room was silent. Time seemed to freeze. Evan's pulse was pounding in his ears. His stomach churned with nausea, a sensation he had never known before. His gaze fell from Alex to Natalie, her face pale and her lips trembling, as though she was trying to find the right words. But no words came. Evan stood frozen in place, his mind working in overdrive, trying to process what he had just walked in on. He had seen the closeness between them over the years, small gestures, inside jokes, the late-night texts and phone calls. But this was different. The chemistry in the room was undeniable, and it hit him like a ton of bricks. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The pain in his chest was sharp, unbearable. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he found his voice. "Is this what's been going on, Natalie?" Evan's voice was low, but the anger simmering beneath it was clear. "Is this what you've been hiding from me all this time?" Natalie's eyes filled with tears as she stood slowly from her chair. She tried to step toward him, but Evan instinctively took a step back. He couldn't bear to be near her right now. Not like this. Not when the truth was laid out so plainly in front of him. I can explain, Evan. Please let me explain." Her voice cracked with emotion, but Evan wasn't sure he could listen. His mind was too clouded with the images of the 2 of them sitting together, so close, sharing a moment that was clearly not just friendship. Alex finally broke his silence. "Evan, man, he started, but Evan cut him off, his voice sharp and filled with bitterness. Just don't. I don't want to hear it from you." Evan's words were like daggers, piercing the air between them. He couldn't look at Alex any longer. His betrayal wasn't just toward him, it was toward everything Evan had built with Natalie. The family, the trust, the love. Evan turned back to Natalie, his eyes searching hers for some kind of explanation, something that could make sense of this nightmare. But all he saw was guilt. Deep, crushing guilt. She wasn't angry, she wasn't defensive. She was broken. And it shattered Evan even more. "I never meant for this to happen," Natalie whispered, her voice barely audible. She wiped a tear from her cheek, looking lost, as though she couldn't even find the words to explain herself. It just happened, Evan?" Evan shook his head in disbelief. The woman he had trusted for 10 years, the mother of his children, was standing before him, confessing to something he never thought possible. The truth had shattered everything. Alex stood from his seat, hesitating for a moment, then quietly made his way toward the door. He knew, as Evan did, that there was no point in staying. The damage had been done. Evan could feel Alex's presence looming behind him, but the air between them felt as heavy as lead. Alex left without a word, slipping out the door and into the night. Now it was just Evan and Natalie. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and Evan didn't know how to break it. His eyes never left her face, trying to find some piece of the woman he had married in the woman standing before him now. But the woman in front of him was not the same person he had loved. Not anymore. Evan stepped back, shaking his head. His chest felt tight and his hands were trembling. 6 months, he whispered hoarsely. 6 months you've been seeing him. All this time you've been lying to me. And now I have to stand here and listen to you tell me it just happened? Natalie's face crumpled, her lips trembling as she reached out toward him. Evan, please. I'm so sorry. It wasn't meant to hurt you, but I didn't know how to stop it. I love you, but I couldn't deny what I felt for Alex. She paused, looking down at her feet, as though the weight of her confession was too much to bear. I never wanted to lose you. I didn't want this to happen, but I was so lost. Evan's heart clenched in his chest, but anger quickly replaced the pain. He couldn't listen to this anymore. He couldn't hear another word about how it wasn't intentional, how it wasn't supposed to happen. It had happened. And the consequences were already clear. No. No, I can't do this, Evan said firmly, turning toward the door. He needed space. He needed time to process everything that had just unraveled. He couldn't stay in this house, in this life, knowing what he knew now. Evan, please, Natalie called after him, but Evan didn't stop. He couldn't. His heart was already breaking, and no amount of apologies could fix what was broken. As he stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of his decision began to settle in. He had to do what was best for himself. For his children. For his future. There was no going back from this. Not anymore. The days that followed felt like an endless blur to Evan. He couldn't quite grasp what had happened, how everything he had known and built had crumbled so suddenly. The house, which had once felt like a home filled with laughter and love, now seemed cold and hollow. Every corner of it reminded him of the life he thought he had, the life he had loved. Evan had barely spoken to Natalie since that night. The confrontation had left him with too many emotions swirling in his chest. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. He had to distance himself from her, from the pain that lingered like a shadow, so he buried himself in work. It was the one thing that felt familiar, that gave him some sense of control. His career, which had always been a source of pride, became his refuge. But even that couldn't take away the hollow ache in his chest. His thoughts often drifted back to that moment when he walked into the office and saw Natalie with Alex. It replayed in his mind over and over again like a sickening loop. Despite his efforts to avoid her, Natalie reached out several times over the next few days. She sent text messages, left voicemails, even emailed him in an attempt to explain herself. But each time, Evan ignored her attempts. There was nothing she could say that would make this right. Nothing she could say that would undo the hurt he felt. She had betrayed him, not only emotionally but in ways he couldn't even begin to comprehend. One evening, a week after the confrontation, Evan came home from work to find a letter on the kitchen counter. It was from Natalie. The handwriting was familiar, but it didn't look the same. The usual fluidity of her writing was gone, replaced by shaky strokes that conveyed the weight of her emotions. With a sigh, Evan picked it up. He hesitated before opening it. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to never read a single word from her again. But another part of him, one that still cared, one that was still trying to make sense of everything, opened it. Inside she wrote, "Evan, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to even speak to me after reading this, but I need you to know the truth. I've been selfish and I can't hide from it anymore. What Alex and I shared wasn't just a moment of weakness. It wasn't just a mistake. It was an affair and I let it go on for far too long. I let it fester in ways that hurt you and hurt our family, and for that I am deeply sorry. I never wanted this to destroy everything we had. I thought for a time that I could have both. But the truth is I've lost everything now and it's all my fault. I love you, Evan. I always have. And I know that I don't deserve forgiveness, but I am asking you to hear me out. If there's even the smallest chance we can fix this, I am willing to do whatever it takes. Please let's talk. Natalie." Evan stared at the letter for a long time. His emotions were a whirlwind, and the pain that had been so sharp at first was now dull, replaced by a crushing sense of exhaustion. How could she think they could fix this? How could she ask him for forgiveness after everything? He crumpled the letter in his hands and threw it into the trash. He didn't want her words anymore. He didn't need them. They meant nothing now. The betrayal had been too great. The damage was done. And Evan couldn't ignore the truth any longer. This marriage, the life they had built, was over. The next day, Evan hired a private investigator. He knew it was a drastic step, but he needed to know the full extent of what had happened. He had seen Alex in their home, had heard the intimate moments through his phone, but he needed proof. The investigator's job was to gather the details, to uncover the full truth. And Evan needed to see it all, even if it tore him apart. A week later, the investigator came back with the findings. Evan sat in his living room, the evening light filtering through the curtains as he read the report. It confirmed what he had feared. The affair had been deeper and more prolonged than he had ever imagined. Alex and Natalie had taken trips together, using a shared credit card. They had gone on vacations, staying in hotels under fake names. Their relationship had been secretive, hidden from everyone, including their closest friends and family. The investigator had also discovered something else, something that hit Evan harder than anything else. It turned out that Alex wasn't just a friend from the past. He had been someone Natalie turned to in moments of vulnerability, someone who had slowly worked his way into her heart. Their relationship wasn't just physical. It was emotional too. Natalie had shared with Alex the things she had never shared with Evan, the insecurities, the doubts, the things that had been missing in their marriage. Evan's anger flared as he read through the details, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. He had trusted her. He had given her everything, and this was how she repaid him. Later that night he sat down with Natalie. There were no more pleasantries, no more small talk. The time for that had passed. He handed her the report, and her face turned pale as she scanned the pages. Evan didn't speak a word. He didn't have to. The evidence was right there in black and white. Natalie began to cry, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Evan, please," she tried to explain, but the words couldn't come fast enough. The truth had already been laid out. There was no way to take it back. Evan looked at her, his eyes cold. "You've destroyed everything. I don't know how I can ever look at you the same way again." He stood up, walking toward the door. He didn't know what the future held. All he knew was that his life, the life he had worked so hard to build, had shattered. And he couldn't put it back together. Not now. Not after everything. The following weeks felt like an eternity for Evan. Every morning he woke up with a weight on his chest, the burden of his shattered world pressing down on him. His mind was clouded with the images of Natalie and Alex, their secret trips, the lies that had piled up over time. But in the midst of this crushing grief, something in Evan began to shift. He couldn't stay in the past forever, drowning in the wreckage of his marriage. He had to move forward. For his children. For himself. Evan focused on what he could control, his career and his kids. He threw himself into his work, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of deadlines and meetings. It was a relief to step into the office each day, to be surrounded by colleagues who didn't know the turmoil he was facing at home. And, in a way, it helped him heal. 6 months after the confrontation, everything began to change. The tech project he had been working on for months had finally taken off. It was the breakthrough he'd been waiting for, the one that could elevate his career to new heights. The investor who had been so impressed by his pitch months ago came back with an offer. It was a big one, a game changer for Evan and his company. For the first time in a long time, Evan felt a spark of hope. He realized that despite everything he had lost, he still had the ability to rebuild. He still had the chance to carve out a new future for himself and his children. At home, things were quieter. Evan had taken full custody of Leo and Olivia. Natalie, while still trying to repair the broken bond with her kids, was no longer a fixture in their daily lives. She had come to visit a few times, attempting to re-establish her place in their world, but the children, especially Leo, had grown distant. Trust, once broken, was difficult to repair, and the kids had begun to associate her absence with the chaos she had caused. Evan had no illusions about how difficult things would be for them. He could see the sadness in Leo's eyes, the way he missed his mother, but he also saw the resilience in his son. And Olivia too had started to adapt to the changes, though her innocence shielded her from fully understanding the gravity of what had happened. Evan knew it was his job to make sure their lives felt as normal as possible, despite the upheaval. He created a routine for them: school in the mornings, after-school soccer for Leo, and art lessons for Olivia, where she could lose herself in her drawings. They spent weekends together at the park, playing games or having picnics, doing things that would bring joy to their little world. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs and it was real. Evan also found himself slowly rebuilding his social life. At work, he'd been so focused on his career that he had shut out his friends and colleagues. But now, with the stress of his home life at least somewhat under control, he made a point to reconnect with people. He attended a few networking events, rejoined old friends for dinners, and even started going to a local gym to work off the tension that had accumulated over the years. For the first time in ages, he felt like he was becoming his own person again, independent of the life he had shared with Natalie. But there were moments, late at night, when Evan would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Memories would flood back. The good times, the vacations they'd taken as a family, the laughter of their children. For a brief moment, he would wonder if he had made the right decision. Was this really the end? Could there ever be a path to healing? But then, as quickly as those thoughts came, he pushed them aside. The decision had been made. Natalie had made it clear that she couldn't be trusted. And for Evan, that was the hardest truth to accept. As months passed, Evan's life began to take shape again, piece by piece. His career flourished, the project he had worked on for years finally bringing him the recognition he had always hoped for. He moved into a new home, a small, cozy place that was perfect for him and the kids. It was their fresh start, their sanctuary from the pain of the past. Natalie, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of her own life. After the affair had been exposed, she lost not only her reputation at work but also a significant portion of her clientele. Clients no longer trusted her, and the agency she had worked so hard to build began to crumble. She had tried to rebuild her relationship with the children, but the emotional damage was too great. Leo, especially, had become distant, no longer responding to her calls or messages. The damage had been done. There were moments when Natalie tried to contact Evan, asking for a chance to talk about the kids, but he had learned not to let her pull him back into the turmoil. He had to focus on the present, not on the mistakes of the past. As much as he had once loved her, as much as he had tried to forgive her, he knew now that the only way forward was to leave the past behind. One evening, as Evan tucked Leo and Olivia into bed, he paused in their doorway. He watched as Leo drifted off to sleep, a peaceful expression on his face, while Olivia curled up with her stuffed animal, her breathing slow and steady. Evan smiled softly, his heart swelling with love for them. They had been through so much, but they were strong. They were his reason for everything. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and times when he would feel overwhelmed. But Evan knew one thing for sure. He had his children, and together they would face whatever came next. He was no longer defined by the past, by the betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable. He had taken the first step toward healing, and now he was finally free. The next chapter of his life had begun.